All right, good morning. Here we go, Nehemiah chapter 10. How many of you remembered that we were on Nehemiah chapter 10? All right, 2, 3 of you, 4 of you. Nehemiah chapter 10 is where we're at. So if you want to flip there, Nehemiah chapter 10. All right, so I'm glad that we could read that piece about the flags, Cheryl. That's really good because my introduction to Nehemiah chapter 10 is in the same vein. 56 men signed the Declaration of Independence. Their conviction resulted in untold sufferings for themselves and their families. Of the 56 men, 5 were captured by the British and tortured before they died. 12 had their homes ransacked and burned. 2 lost their sons in the Revolutionary Army. Another had 2 sons captured. 9 of the 56 fought and died from wounds or hardships of the war. Carter Braxton of Virginia, a wealthy planter and trader, saw his ships sunk by the British Navy. He sold his home and properties to pay off his debts and died in poverty. At the Battle of Yorktown, the British General Cornwallis had taken over Thomas Nelson's home for his headquarters. Nelson quietly ordered George Washington to open fire on the Nelson home. The home was destroyed and Nelson died bankrupt. John Hart was driven from his wife's bedside as she was dying. Their 13 children fled for their lives. His fields and mill were destroyed. For over a year, he lived in a forest and in caves, returning home only to find his wife dead and his children vanished. A few weeks later, he died from exhaustion. How many of you knew that about the signers of the Declaration of Independence and what they went through for our freedoms? These guys lived, they fought, and they died to ensure the freedoms that we enjoy in the United States of America to this day. These guys, most of them, gave everything they had in service to this nation, this concept, this experiment, as they almost thought of it, so that we could have something greater in the future. And now we are recipients and participants as a result of their great sacrifice. Today, as we read from Nehemiah chapter 10, God wants you to see real commitment. As we continue on in the book of Nehemiah, these guys here that are going through what Nehemiah is leading them through, they've gone through some really tough stuff. Now, we probably need a little bit of refresher since it's been a little while since we've thought about Nehemiah. Or have you been in Nehemiah reading this extensively and exhaustively over the last 3 months? I heard some chuckles, a lot of crickets. All right, so Nehemiah. So let's refresh ourselves on Nehemiah, where we're at, and what we're doing, so that we just don't jump right into a cold pool here. So chapters 1 through 6 of the book of Nehemiah is all about rebuilding the walls, and Nehemiah rebuilding the walls. Chapters 7 through 10 is the reforming the people. So after the walls get built, Nehemiah starts to think about the people and how do they need to be rebuilt. And then in chapters 11 through 13 is all about reclaiming the culture. Once the people are established, once the walls are built, then we can start to think about the culture that the people have here. Remember, Nehemiah returned to Jerusalem about 444 BC, maybe a little less than 150 years after the Babylonian exile. Remember, that's the time of Daniel, when we studied Daniel. So Nehemiah heard about the walls being destroyed, how nothing has been done. They rebuilt the temple, but it's kind of a paltry attempt compared to Solomon's temple. And remember, the older generation, when they saw that temple built, the Zerubbabel's temple, as it's finished, they remembered the glory of Solomon's temple. And as they saw this new temple of Zerubbabel, they cried, they wept. Ezra tells us that they wept when they saw how paltry it was compared to the glory of Solomon's temple. But they had no walls. The walls had been crumbled down and just left in ruins. Even though there was a temple, they needed walls. Walls were a sign of strength, a sign of virtue. It was a defensive system that they had at that time. But they didn't have any walls. And Nehemiah hears that there's no walls, and so he decides to make the trip back to Jerusalem. It's a 1,000-mile trek. And he didn't just get in an airplane or a train. He didn't get into a car. He didn't take a bus. It was a long hoof-by-hoof trek, 1,000 miles from Susa to Jerusalem. And he went there, and he examined what was going on, and he rebuilt these walls. You remember how many days it took to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem? Does anybody remember? 52 days it took to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. And he did a wonderful job of organizing the people and getting them to get this work done. But then once the walls are built, now we have other issues. The people themselves need to be reformed. They've been so far away from all different things. They've kind of forgotten a lot about what God wanted them to know, and they were far away from Him. And Nehemiah decides that it's time to reform the people. So he brings them together, and he starts working with them, and they start reading the law. Ezra's with him as a contemporary, and Ezra's reading the book of the law, and they start to figure things out, like, wow, we need to keep this Feast of Tabernacles, don't we? And so they keep the Feast of Tabernacles, and they move on. And now today we're in chapter 10. And all these people there decided, kind of like the signers of the Declaration of Independence, we need to keep this commitment, this oath that we've had with God. We need to keep this with Him, and we're going to sign our names on the dotted line that we're going to keep His commandments, we're going to follow His oath, and we're going to do what is right in His sight. And this is what we're going to do, and we're going to sign our names to it, much like those signers of the Declaration of Independence. And so we're going to see the commitment of these guys and gals as they make this commitment to the Lord. I want you to think about this as we go through this, as we read this, as we study this. How much commitment do you think that they gave to the Lord? You know, Amy and I were watching a show the other day, and the lady said that she loved her fiance 90%. What's so funny about that? She was serious. She loved him 90%. And I said, Amy, how would you feel if I said that I loved you 90%? That's a solid A, isn't it, guys? In academia, that's an A, isn't it? I love you 90%. I want you to tell Joe how you just love her 90%. You might want to move your chair over a little bit before you do that, wouldn't you? I love you 90. What if I loved you 90%? What if you loved your kids 90%? 90%. That's good enough, isn't it? She thought it was good enough. Is it good enough, guys? If you told me that you loved God 90%, is that, you know, guys, as you think about Christianity today, as you think about people that have claimed Christianity, maybe your own Christian walk, maybe other people that you know who claim to be Christians, they go to church, what percent do you think they love the Lord? Honestly, in my opinion, I think 90% would be a little high. What do you think? I think 90% is probably a little high. And we laugh, and we think that it's a big joke when I say that I love Amy 90%. It's a joke when I say, Jeff, you might want to move your chair over a little bit if you tell Joe you love her 90%. But it's okay if 90% is a little high when we think about our love and commitment to God. That's okay, isn't it? No. It's not okay. We should be rocking 100%. In fact, don't hate me forever. I should love God. Now, this is going to blow everybody's minds. Are you ready for this? I'm glad you're all sitting down for this one. I should love God more than I love Amy. Is anybody with me on that one? Do you love God more than your spouse? Do you love your spouse more than God? How about we put another spin on it? Do you love your kids more than you love God? Do you love your job more than you love God? Do you love camping more than you love God? Do you love money more than you love God? What kind of commitment do you have to God? Is it 90% love to him? What is it? If you had a piece of paper and you had to write it down, nobody's going to look. We're not going to judge you. I'm not going to bring you up here and get you on national television telling everybody how much you love God. But if you had in the margin of your mind, write it down. How much did you love God this last week? Yesterday, this morning? How much do you plan on loving God today? How do you plan on demonstrating that? What if you came up here and you just had this big thing like, I'm going to love God 100%, I don't care what you think, and then you go home and you do what? How are you going to demonstrate that? Because we should be not just hearers of the word, but doers of the word. Guys, I'm going to love God 100%. Okay, go ahead. Go ahead and do that then. If I told Amy that I love her 100% and never brought her flowers and never kissed her and never told her that I loved her and, treated her like trash and never helped her with the dishes or anything like that, how much would you say that I loved her?
90%.
Maybe 90% at best. Sometimes this is our relationship with God. I want you to think about that as we think about Nehemiah chapter 10. What did these guys give to God? How much commitment did they have to God? What was their level of commitment? When these guys who were signers of the Declaration of Independence, what if they were only given 90% of themselves to this great experiment that we call the United States of America? If they had just only gave 90%, would we even be sitting here today? What if those guys during World War II, they land on the beach at Normandy and they just were going to give 90%? What language would we be speaking right now? I don't know. It might not be English. How much do you give, guys? What is your level of commitment? So God wants you to see real commitment. If you've never seen it before, Nehemiah chapter 10, we're going to see some real commitment. Verses 1 through 27, there's three types of commitment that we're going to see here. Number 1, verses 1 through 27, we see a commitment to the seals of God. That's what it's going to say here. Now, those who placed their seal on the document were these seals of God. We're going to see them. Verses 28 through 31, second type, we see a commitment to the statutes of God. There's going to be statutes that they're going to say are important and that they're going to keep and they're going to maintain. And then finally, the third type, verses 32 through 39, we see a commitment to the service of God. Not only the statutes that they keep, but there's going to be things that they should do. Not just things they should keep, like a statute or a law, but there's things that they should do just because the doing of it is right. So this is the commitment that they're going to have. So let's start to look at this. Does anybody want to come up and read these first 27 verses for me? I'm willing to take volunteers. Nobody? You're going to make me read this? No, I'm not going to read this. I'm just going to say Nehemiah and his friends. Is that fair? Now, those who placed their seal on the document were Nehemiah the governor. Hold on just a second. Why is it that this is Nehemiah? Just as a side note, a little parenthesis. I remember the first time I read the prelude to the book, the Gospel of John. And it said, behold, there was a man who come forth from God whose name was John, and he came as a witness. Remember that verse? I remember for the longest time, I thought that was the writer of the Gospel of John. There's just too many Johns. It's like, God, why didn't you name him something else? You had control of everything. Why did you name two different people John? You're confusing me. In this instance here, in verse number 1, Nehemiah, that is our boy. That's Nehemiah, the author of Nehemiah, the governor of, that's him. He is the first one to sign his name. What might we call him as the signer of the Declaration of Independence? The John Hancock. He wanted his name on there first, biggest. Y'all need to know that I'm in. Nehemiah signed it first. If we were going to have a little charter here that said we're going to serve God, we're going to do this here, who's going to sign it first? Right? Or would you wait until I'll sign it when everybody else has? If there's room on the paper, I'll sign it. Some of us are Christians like that. I want to challenge you guys to be a Christian like this. You're going to sign your name first. Your commitment is 100%. your love for God, your commitment to Him, 100%. I will sign my name first. If there's something that needs to be done, I'm going to sign my name first. Biggest, most pronounced, easiest to see and read. I am number one. Because my commitment is real and genuine. And that's what Nehemiah did. The governor, the son of Hilkiah, Zedekiah, and his friends through verse 27. They all wrote their names down. They're going to be seen and accounted for and heard. These guys showed some real commitment. Now, why is this such a big deal? Because at this time, they needed to have some walls built. Just because it looked nice. It made them feel better. Is that why they built walls? Is that why they needed walls? There were enemies all around. Remember Sanballat? These other guys who were against Nehemiah and the building of the walls. There were a lot of enemies out there. And they would love to get their hands on a piece of paper for who all the leaders are. Then they'd know who to target. They'd know who to take down first. If you were up against somebody in battle and you needed to take out the leaders, wouldn't it be great if somebody handed you a piece of paper that said, these are all the leaders, go take them out? Would you want your name on that list? I don't know. Nehemiah was first. He says, you come and get me, guys. You just come on down. His commitment to God was real. And I want to challenge you guys to have just as real of a commitment to God and doing what He asks you to do. So then in verse 28, because I'm not reading all those names, if you're anything like me, you have a hard enough time not looking stupid. I don't need any help. And reading those names aren't going to help. So let's look at this. Number 2, we see a commitment to the statutes of God. So these seals, they had a real commitment to God. And now let's look at a commitment to the statutes of God. And they say this in verse 28. Now the rest of the people, the priests, the Levites, the gatekeepers, the singers, the Nephilim, and all those who'd separated themselves from the peoples of the lands to the law of God, their wives, their sons, their daughters, and everyone who had knowledge and understanding. So all these people, they separated themselves from the rest, from the herd. There were other peoples or other groups around here. The Samaritans are starting to become a thing. Who are the Samaritans, by the way? They're like a half-breed. A group of Jews started marrying non-Jews, and they started having families and lineage and on it going. All of a sudden, they're a thing now. And that's who Jesus talked to in John chapter 4, the Samaritan woman. We've heard the parable of the Good Samaritan. It's this group of people. These guys here, these that are the seals of God, who wrote their names down, and now it says, and the rest of the people, they all separated themselves from all this other fluff. We want a unified core of people here who are going to separate themselves from the peoples of the land to the law of God. Their wives, their sons, their daughters, and everyone who had knowledge and understanding. These joined with their brethren, their nobles, and entered into a curse and an oath to walk in God's law, which was given by Moses, the servant of God, and to observe and do all the commandments of the Lord our God and His ordinances and His statutes. Now, as you remember in the book of Deuteronomy, Exodus, there's all kinds of places where God had given statutes and ordinances and laws that He expected the people to follow. And remember those 10 commandments after Moses came down? And Moses said, are you guys going to follow these things? They said, no, I don't think so. No, what did they say? They said, yes, we will do them. For crying out loud, Moses didn't hardly come down off the mountain, and they were building a golden calf to worship that. It's like, guys, you ever facepalm? You ever hear somebody do something and you just go, guys, I swear that's what Moses had to have been like. He didn't even hardly come down off the mountain, and they're building golden calves. That was their level of commitment, apparently. They were all 100. We're 100% in, Moses, count us in. And then they're off building a golden calf. You ever been like that in your Christian life? You have this instance where you're like, yeah, I'm going to be all in for God, and I'm in, and let's do this, and you no sooner get home and you're building a golden calf. We do that sometimes, guys. Maybe it's not that you're building a golden calf, but I could have sworn that there's all different kinds of sins out there. All different kinds of trouble you can get yourself into. All different kinds of things you're not supposed to do. Things you're not supposed to watch. Things you're not supposed to say. Things you're not supposed to deal with. Things you're not supposed to associate with. Right? Your struggles aren't my struggles. And my struggles aren't necessarily your struggles. But you have struggles and you have sin. And there are things in your life that do weigh you down. That you do have problems with. All God's people said amen. Okay? And you get home after this experience of, yeah! And you get home and guess who's waiting for you? Satan. He's waiting for you. You don't think he's home waiting for you? You don't think he's at home waiting for you? Of course he is. He knows exactly which buttons to push on you. He knows exactly how to get you to fall and to sin. But God told the people in Deuteronomy that if you do what you're supposed to do, I'll bring the rains, I'll bless you, I'll take care of you. And on the other hand, if you guys are going to mess this up, I will withhold the rains, and there will be famine in your time. And we'll have all kinds of problems, and there'll be all kinds of cursings. It's in Deuteronomy. And wouldn't you know it, there came a day when God sent him off into exile because he just couldn't take it anymore with them. His patience was long, and he waited a long time to do that, but he finally did it. He just took him off right at the knees. He was done. So if you guys are going to keep messing up, there's cursings in it for you, and we're going to have to straighten it out. And God sent him into exile, and he's bringing him back because he did promise to bring him back. Remember that prophecy from Ezekiel when he shaved off his beard and he put it into 3 different parts? Third of it got into the fire, third of it went into the wind, third of it was kind of saved. Then there was all the little hairs that landed on the floor. Remember that? And God says, all those little hairs that land on the floor, I'm going to gather them up and I'm going to bring them back into the land. There will be a remnant that will be saved, that will be brought back. This is that remnant. God wasn't kidding when he said, I'm going to bring you guys back and we're going to get this all straightened out. Sometimes we need straightened out, don't we? You ever gotten taken out to the wood pile? Once in a while, guys. Every once in a while, you need to be taken out to the rock pile and made part of it. And God will do that with you. If he hasn't already in your life, most of us are old enough, that's probably happened once or twice. God's brought me out to the wood pile before too. Made me a part of it. Okay, it happens. Straighten me out, right? You ever need straightened out? These guys have been freshly straightened out. And you know what happens to a group of people when they done get straightened out? They realize what's important. They realize what they need to do to stay straightened out. And they need to keep a commitment to these statutes of God that had been given to them so many years ago by the prophet Moses. And they need to keep these laws, these statutes, these commandments so that they don't get made part of the rock pile again. And guys, if you don't want to be made part of that rock pile, you got to get straightened out. You got to do what is right. You need to have a commitment to these statutes of God. It says in verse 30, we would not give our daughters as wives to the people of the land, nor take their daughters as for our sons. If the peoples of the land brought wares or any grain to sell on the Sabbath day, we would not buy it from them on the Sabbath or on a holy day, and we would forego the 7th year's produce and the exacting of every debt. So they started to do the things that they knew were right. They knew this stuff all along. It's been here for how many centuries? But they decided, if we're going to be committed to God and do what is right and be straightened out, we're going to need to start doing what he tells us to do. How often do you guys do exactly what you're supposed to do? It's not a trick question. We have problems with this. We need to have a commitment to the statutes of God. As the seals of God, who are going to put ourselves out there and say, yes, count me in, you now need to have a commitment to the statutes of God. We also need to have a commitment to the service of God, because it's one thing to understand all the laws and you make a chart and you have all this, don't do that, can't you read the sign, and that's all fine and dandy and everything's real good there. But sometimes you just need to go do stuff that's right. It isn't about not lying. Sometimes you need to go do something that's right too. So, he says in verse 32, and I may not read all these, but in verse 32, we also made ordinances for ourselves to exact from ourselves yearly 1/3 of a shekel of the service, for the service of the house of our God, for the showbread, for the regular grain offering, for the regular burnt offerings of the Sabbaths and new moons, and on it goes. And so, in verse 32, he begins to tell us they begin to exact themselves yearly 1/3 of a shekel for service. So they're starting to think about how they can serve God. And where in the Old Testament does that service take place? Does anybody remember? Starts with the letter T. The temple. Everybody goes, oh, right, yes. Temple. Okay. Is everybody awake? Everybody awake? Temple. Temple was the correct answer. Temple. So, that thing doesn't just pay for itself, you know. Somehow we got to, afford this thing. And they realize the way that they're going to afford this thing is if they begin to give to it. Because for a long time they hadn't given to it, and they just kind of let it rot away, and Nebuchadnezzar comes along and destroys it anyway. And you got to give to it. If you got to, what does they say that? Put up or shut up? You've heard that before. That's not new to anybody here. Do you want this thing to fly or not? Well, you got to grease the wheels then. Maybe you've heard that one before too. You got to grease the wheels. Well, they realize they got to grease the wheels. And they have this commitment to now serving God in the temple, and they're going to have to do something about it. So they're going to expect from themselves yearly 1/3 of shekel for service. That might not sound like much, but to them they thought that was probably going to be enough. And there's other things that they're going to do here. In verse 34, they're going to bring some wood to the priests, because when you have a burnt offering, what is the fire? You just snap your fingers and fire starts. You got to have something to burn, and so they would burn wood. Well, where's that wood coming from? Were they just going to equip the priests with axe and say, go out and get it, boys? Why don't they bring the priests the wood? How about that? If you're so committed to serving God, why don't you bring the priests the wood? Well, guess what they did? We're going to commit to doing that. Verse 34, we cast lots among the priests, the Levites, and the people for bringing the wood offerings into the house of God, according to our fathers' houses, at the appointed time of the year, to burn on the altar of the Lord, as it is written in the law. So that's good. They're going to commit to doing this. Verses 35 through 37, to bring the first fruits into the house of the Lord. What is the first fruits? That first ripening, when things are starting to get ready, as they're growing things. That first one, God says, I want the first fruits, guys. I want the best. I want the first. I want you guys to realize that it's me that's going to take care of you and not your fields. It's not your fields that take care of you. I know you get your tomatoes out of the garden. I understand that. But it's not that sustains you. It's me, God speaking. And I want the first one out of there. Can he expect that? He sure can. And when he says that's what he wants, you don't give him the last one. You don't give him the leftovers. You don't give him, the bad ones. You give him the first ones, the best ones, the choice ones, the plump ones, the perfect ones. Those ones go right to God, right off the top, right now. Do you guys give first fruits to God? If you had in the margin of your mind, as you're thinking about I love God 100%. I'm not one of those 90%ers. I'm 100%, I love God. Okay, do you give God your first fruit? Well, no. That's like my last line item in my budget. Are you at 100% now? All of a sudden, I don't know if you're at 100% or not. I don't know. You think about that one. Think about that one. You 100% given to God or not? And then in verses 38 through 39, to bring a tithe to the Lord. Oh, now we're stepping on toes here, aren't we? They decided that they were going to give a tithe to the Lord. And the priests, the descendants of Aaron, shall be with the Levites. This is verse 38. When the Levites receive tithes, and the Levites shall bring 1/10 of the tithes to the house of God for the rooms of the storehouse, for the children of Israel and the children of Levi shall bring the offering of the grain and the new wine, the oil to the storerooms where the articles of the sanctuary are. where the priests who minister and the gatekeepers and the singers are, and we will not neglect the house of our God. They were committed, guys. They were willing to write their names down nice, big, and legible so everybody, even their enemies, would know that they're in this to win this. They were willing to put themselves out there and to say that we need to follow these statutes of God because this is what is right. We're going to do the service to God at the temple because that's what is right. We're not going to leave anything left unchecked. We are 100% in. And so that's our challenge today. As we see this real commitment of these people to God, our challenge today is that each one of us would be just as committed to God. We're not 90% in love with God, just like you're not 90% in love with your spouse. It's kind of a joke. And I know, right? Oh, it's okay to only be 9% in love with your spouse? Well, some of us think that's okay. Some of us live like that. And some of us also live like it's okay to give God 40% of our lives, too. That's also a joke, by the way. I've got a story for you to close. On a recent trip to Haiti, I heard a Haitian pastor illustrate to his congregation the need for total commitment to Christ. Here's this parable. A certain man wanted to sell his house for $2,000. Another man, wanting very badly to buy it because he was poor, he couldn't afford the full price. After much bargaining, the owner agreed to sell the house for half the original price with just one stipulation. He would retain ownership of one small nail protruding from just over the front door. And after several years, the original owner wanted to buy the house back, but that new owner was unwilling to sell. So the first owner went out, found the carcass of a dead dog, and hung it from that single nail that he still owned. The Haitian pastor's conclusion was this: if we leave the devil even one small peg in our life, he will return to hang his rotting garbage from it, making our lives unfit for Christ's habitation. Some of us have one nail left. Some of us have like 1,000,000 nails left. But we all have at least one nail left that Satan loves to come back to in our lives and hang his rotten garbage from. And we're dumb enough, just like a dog that returns to its own vomit, we're dumb enough to go back to that garbage. We're dumb enough to go back to that sewage because we're unwilling to get rid of that last nail and be 100% committed to following our God and our great Savior. How committed are you to following Jesus Christ? Let's pray.